Hey guys, it's time for social studies today, and we are learning about one of the most fun things you will ever learn about in social studies. Maybe not ever, but at least this year. And that is the Texas Revolution. Woo! Texas Revolution! So exciting. So many new things. But before we get started, let's start talking about what we learned about right before Thanksgiving. That stuff is so important for you to know and remember because it helps us understand the Texas Revolution. So, let's start talking about the Spanish government. So, there's Texas and Mexico. We're all under the Spanish government, right? Mexico didn't like that. They said, we do not like this. You guys live way over there. We live way over here. We should rule ourselves. So they had the Mexican Revolution. And what happened was they won. And Mexico formed a government. They formed a government similar to ours. It was a democracy with 3 branches of government and a constitution. And Texas now, it wasn't called Texas then, remember, but Texas now, we're under the rule of Mexican government. All right, so now we went from old Spanish government, new Mexican government. So here we are under the Mexican government. The Mexican government says, we're going to start a land grant policy. Here's our land grant policy. We want people to come colonize, which means live in, come colonize Texas. So all these people started to come to Texas because there were these impresarios that were given land grants, and they helped colonize Texas. One in particular that we have kind of been talking a lot about is Stephen F. Austin. Now, Stephen F. Austin, he fulfilled his father's dream. His father's dream was to help colonize Texas and be an impresario. Unfortunately, his father passed away. So Stephen F. Austin was like, okay, I will finish what my dad started. So here we are. Stephen F. Austin is an impresario. He has been given land, and he is helping colonize Texas. He wanted hard-working colonists to come live in Texas, and they kind of got some perks. Free land. Their land was free. The Mexican government was giving out land. The impresarios were giving out land. It was free. So they got to come live in a new life. They were also doing some debt forgiveness for people who had debts that lived in other parts. So they had a lot of perks coming over here. It was a brand new life, a brand new start. And that's how a lot of people viewed it. So when we're talking about the Texas Revolution, keep all of that in mind, that order of events that happened. So today, we're going to talk about some changes that the settlers made when they moved from the United States to Mexico. Efforts that were made by Texas to settle the differences that they had with Mexico and what caused the Texas Revolution. We won't get to all of it today, but we'll get to some of it. So let's start talking about Anglo-Americans who were moving to Texas. Anglo-Americans were the people who were living in the United States, and they're starting to move to Texas. So in the 1820s, thousands of them were moving to Texas. Guys, like I said, there were so many perks of coming to Texas. And a lot of them were writing GTT on their doors before they left, and that meant gone to Texas. Now, these Anglos, they brought ideas and customs with them. They brought their own way of life. They're their own people. And sometimes that differed from the Mexican way of life. That's a really big, important thing to remember, guys. Their way of life that they were used to was different than how the Mexican way of life. Very different. But if you move to another state, they have different traditions and cultures than we do. I'm sure of it. So it's just different. You're different people. You're from different areas. I don't know if y'all got to see all those pictures. I'm going to go back real quick. These are some pictures from that time. So you just get a sneak peek on maybe being able to transport yourself back in time and visualize, reading strategy, visualize what's going on. Okay, so anyone who then moved to Texas had to become a citizen of Mexico. The freedoms in Mexico were different than the freedoms the Anglos were used to in the United States. So freedoms in the United States, freedoms in Mexico, they were different. So Mexico says you have to become a citizen of Mexico if you're going to live here, which makes sense. Remember, Texas is ruled by the Mexican government. So it's that's why they are telling us what to do. So the Anglo settlers wanted to live under a democracy. They wanted to elect their own leaders and have their representatives elect their leaders. Now remember, the Mexican government is a democratic government, but I did say it was a little bit different, so stay tuned to keep talking about that. But that's what they wanted. They wanted a democracy. They wanted to elect their own leaders or maybe have their representatives do it for them. They also the Anglos promised to adopt the Catholic religion as their own religion. The Mexican government said Catholicism, being a Catholic, that is our religion. That is what everybody is going to adopt. And the Anglos, when they came to Texas, they promised that. But they didn't keep that promise. They wanted to choose their own religion as they had in the United States. So the United States was letting them choose their own religion. Texas, it's Mexico. It's the same area. Just remember, I'm saying Texas when they moved there. They didn't give them a choice. They said you have to be Catholic, and they weren't following that rule. So most of the Anglos that came from the United States, they spoke English. They didn't speak Spanish like the leaders in Mexico. So they had a hard time talking about their differences. You can imagine if you've ever spoken to anybody who speaks another language, it's a hard thing to try and communicate with them. And then imagine if you had a problem with them and you're trying to solve that problem, but you can't because you speak a different language. So that would be a real problem because they're like, hey, we have some problems we want to talk about, but they don't speak English and you don't speak Spanish. That would just be really hard. And finally, the last one we're going to talk about is the settlers in Texas wanted the government to pay for public schools for children. The Mexican government refused to do this. They said, we are not paying for school. Are you crazy? But the people in Texas, they wanted that. So the settlers in Texas, they wanted them to pay for public schools. But the Mexican government was like, nope, we're not doing that. So today, these are some causes of the Texas Revolution. These are some things that they're like, okay, this is happening. We can't choose our religion. We want a democracy. We want to say in things. We want it to be like our culture is different. We don't speak the same language. And you won't pay for our kids to go to school. You won't pay for public schools. Obviously now, the government does give funding and money to public schools so we can stay open. But back then it didn't. Could you imagine? Everybody's having to pay out of their own pocket and get stuff. That would be so hard. Now we have some support. So today, this is the reasons why Texas was upset with Mexico. This is why we even had the Texas Revolution to begin with. It's so important that you know the background on that. So I am going to create a little timeline. I'll show it to you in the next video of kind of what's going on here. So you can see the progression of where we started to the Texas Revolution. See what led up to it. But for now, for your assignment, there's a link and an explanation right down below this video of what you're going to do and what your assignment is. So make sure to read that so you know what you're doing. All right, guys. I love y'all. Have a great day.